Hey team, welcome back to the show. Today I am here with the whole crew, well, minus Michelle. I'm here with Andrea and Natalie, talking about everybody's favorite movement, Romanian deadlifts. One of the best movements we have to build posterior chain as a whole. I think if you want to build great glutes especially, which many of the listeners do, probably one of the best movements for us to prioritize getting strong at. Issue is most people just don't know how to execute it correctly. I think almost every new client, it is like such a treasure to have a client who starts in week one, they're doing their RDL correctly. That is one of those ones where I can think of like two people in the entirety of coaching who have done it. But when you see someone right away like nail it, it's like, wow, this is crazy. This is a gift. Because it only takes a long time to master. It is one of our more difficult movements to master. Most people just spend years stretching their lower back versus actually training their glutes and hamstrings well. And as I kind of alluded to, probably one of the most common movements we have to troubleshoot and fix with clients. So today, we're just going to do a deep dive into how to finally fix your RDL. No more back pain, way more glute and hamstring gains. Again, getting good at this movement is going to be one of our biggest keys to voluptuous glutes. Somebody said the word voluptuous to me via Instagram DM the other day, and I was like, that is such a good word. I need to start using that more. And
To your physique, or
it was not. I have not heard that yet in regards to my physique. Although I will say I feel like my pecs are getting quite voluptuous, but voluptuous breast, if you will. But outside of that, no. She was talking about her glutes though, actually. But anyways, any other arguments for or disclaimers around RDLs before we talk about the nuances here from either of you? Basically, benefits we get from it. I would say as a whole, from a function perspective as well, like being able to pick stuff up, like hinge and pick stuff up is also very important. So from a functional perspective, like if you're strong at hinging, you're going to be pretty anti-fragile through life. All right, so Natalie, can you give us a breakdown, just high level, what is an RDL? What does this movement look like?
RDL is a hinge movement. So I always like to say it's a horizontal movement, right? We're moving back to front. Um, you can use several different loading methods. So I know we'll go through this later, but the at its core, I guess, is just a hinge movement. So we're setting our hips back in space and then bringing them forward again. And the glutes and hamstrings are lengthening. Um, and yeah, that's what it is. And
I
from a
think
functional perspective, we're like think like picking something off the ground.
thinking of it as a horizontal movement in itself, though, is a big light bulb moment for a lot of people. A lot of people think about just picking up and lowering the weight, and that's when at least I find people are just rounding over more versus again sending the hips backwards in space. He said, okay, we're training glutes, hamstrings, really training the entire posterior chain, challenging them in like somewhat of the lengthened position as well. Cool. Anything else you would like to add there, Coach Angie, before we move on?
No.
Cool. Okay. Dude, just like most muscular, so everybody watching this on YouTube can see how shredded you are right now. Also, I
Is
also
that
selfishly just
this
want
one?
to, yeah, just let's see those delts. Nice. Wish you guys could see how fucking striated Andrea's delts are right now. It's sick. All right. So, talking about mistakes. Again, in a nutshell, like, would you guys agree that this is probably one of the, when we're looking at someone who really wants to build their glutes, especially, RDLs is going to be one of our staples of some variation of this. We're absolutely going to want that client to be good at. Are we all in agreement there? We have like split squats, probably some other squat pattern, and then a hinge. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, both split squats and RDLs. Whenever I'm asking someone like the list of questions at the end of a mesocycle, one of the questions is like, is there anything that you're just not enjoying? Split squats and RDLs are always there, and they're always every single time they say it's split squats and
But I know it's
RDLs,
good
but
for
I
me.
know I need to still do them.
I get that so often as well. And like in people's check-in forms, the like any movements that aren't feeling good, you're not connecting with, always split squats. But I know it's good for me. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Also, two of the movements people struggle with the most. So let's talk through mistakes. I kind of want to lay this out as if we were starting from like setup, walking up to, let's say we're doing a barbell RDL, walking up to the bar all the way through execution of the rep. So let's just kick it off with the initial setup as we're walking up to the bar, grabbing the bar. First, I think people like if we're talking a barbell RDL, just grabbing the bar too wide is a bit of an issue for most people. If we take our grip too wide, your upper back will become more of a limiter here. On the flip side, if you take your hands too narrow, I find people are in a place where it's like their hands are more likely to run into their knees. Typically, what I'll say is just like hands right about shoulder width, so your hands are right outside, or your thumbs are right outside of your knees. If we're talking like a barbell RDL, don't really need to think about this on dumbbell RDLs, but like a trap bar or RDL, this is where we can run into issues if the trap bar is too wide relative to the individual, which will be the case for a lot of shorter women, where in theory this might be a good movement, but your grip is just so wide that your upper back starts failing first, or we see like your upper back rounding, you're getting a lot more rounding there. A lot of times it's just a matter of your grip being a bit too wide. So not too narrow, not too wide. Basically thumbs right outside of your legs, I think is a pretty good rule of thumb. Would y'all agree there? Anything else you would add? No?
Not on grip specifically.
Natalie has her hand raised.
Yeah, don't mix grip.
Good point.
Yeah.
Like I've seen it, especially with like newer clients who maybe are coming from a CrossFit or powerlifting background. Like this is just begging for imbalances. Just
I'm pretty
don't.
convinced this is the root of a lot of my pain in my back because I did mixed grip for a while.
Pretty sure
Um,
Natalie's the root of a lot of the pain in my back.
Root of all evil.
Go on, I'm sorry.
Anyway, whenever you have one hand backward and one hand forward, you're more externally rotated on one side, more internally rotated on one side. So your back is going to engage differently side to side, and you're not going to be able to brace as properly. It does feel stronger, but you can very easily solve that issue with just putting on some wrist straps.
Just wonder if that's like the root of my shoulder issues because
Definitely
the
could
way
be.
that I would the way that I used to or like intuitively mix grip is like I would go underhand with my left and overhand with my right, so supinated versus pronated, and like if you look at my back pose, that's exactly the imbalance. It's like one shoulder biases external rotation, the other biases internal rotation.
It's one of your heaviest lifts. And
Yep.
so you're constantly loading it in that position. So it makes sense that you're going to strengthen and reinforce that movement pattern.
And you're like breathing
Yeah.
like pretty heavy. It like this is the heaviest weight you will ever lift.
Yeah.
And so like that breathing is just gonna like reinforce those positions. Damn it.
So easy fix here.
Take it all
Don't
back.
don't do over under grip. Just use grip assistance, please. Um, I would recommend for any client use wrist straps, Versa grips, something of the sort. Your grip should be the limiting factor here if we're not using assistance anyways. Like your grip muscles should be weaker than your glutes, hamstrings. We want glutes, hamstrings to be the thing that fail. So we're probably going to need some grip assistance. So just use grip assistance and it fixes a lot of the issues here. Next up is going to be your stance. So, okay, we have gripped the bar, we picked it up, now we're setting our feet. Very common issue here is going to be people just setting their stance too wide. So you need to internally rotate at the hip for us to really be able to get into the bottom of that RDL, into the bottom of the hinge and stretch the glute well. So if our stance is too wide, it is going to be making it harder for us to internally rotate and again, push the hips as far back in space. We're going to just start compensating other areas like our lower back. And then similarly, when people twist their feet out too much, so we're externally rotated too much at the feet, it is going to make it harder for us to, again, achieve that internal rotation at the hip we want because our feet are kind of taking us in an opposite direction of what our hips want to do. That's a super common one I see. For some reason, people want to like point their feet out at a 45-degree angle. Really what I would say here is to simplify, probably put feet right about hip width apart and pointed straight forward. Would you all agree? Anything to add there?
Yeah, I've had a lot of clients who argue this with me, which is always really interesting. And they're like, well, that's just the way that I'm built. I had a dance background. And actually, by the way, I also had a dance background. So this is probably the root of my hip issues. because I bias
We're
external
getting to
rotation.
the bottom of everything.
This is why I don't have glutes, because I like bias external rotation at the hip, and it's really hard for me to get that internal hip rotation. But I've had clients sort of like argue with me and be like, this is the way I'm built. And it's like, right, but you also told me that you want glutes.
You
So
don't want to be built the way you're built.
yeah, so we need to fix this. Like we need to address it. And just because like this is a comfortable position for you does not mean it's actually the most conducive toward growing your glutes or hamstrings. So
It's
sorry.
probably a sign that their hips are pretty tight
Yeah.
because they feel more comfortable that way. And so whenever the feet are turned out, we're not able to take the glutes through a full range of motion where they lengthen and then contract. They're just sort of contracted the whole time.
The pelvis can't actually rotate
Yeah.
is the problem. And so there are little other things and primer movements that we can kind of do and other supportive movements we can do to kind of like facilitate that a little bit better. But long story short, even if you have a dance background, have that like ballerina stance, that duck stance, like you've like it's not conducive to this movement. So we need to address it.
I think a lot of it comes from, I know for a long time, I always heard the cue, and when you're squatting or deadlifting, you want to try to screw your feet into the floor. So put them in the floor at like that about 45-degree angle and twist outwards like you're gripping them into the floor, which is also going to be less than ideal here. If we're shifting our weight, we're essentially there kind of shifting weight to the outside of the foot, where really we want balanced foot pressure as a whole, but we don't want to be losing weight like over the arches, over the inside of your feet. If we're like pushing for internal rotation, and again, like our force production is going to be so much better if we have good foot pressure with the inside of the foot. So feet point is straightforward. Anything else in terms of stance, grip, anything like that before we move on to bracing and positioning?
I always say with the stance width, like just get your feet underneath your hips.
Yeah, it's an easy way to go about it.
Like, and then I'll just tell clients, like, if you were to jump up and down, like, the second that you go to like prep for that jump, look at your feet. Like, that's just intuitively going to be your strongest position. And this is what we want, is we want this, like, the most leverage and the strongest position so we can produce the most force.
Perfect. Okay. Let's talk about bracing and positioning. One big one, Andrea, I'm going to have you take this one. Big one is not keeping your rib cage stacked over your pelvis and just not bracing correctly as a whole. Can you talk through like when we're doing an RDL, like how you would kind of cue or how you're personally thinking about our rib cage versus pelvis positioning, why this is important?
Yeah, so in order to properly brace your core, you need your rib cage and your pelvis sit over the top of each other like a canister. So the diaphragm, which sits at the bottom of your rib cage, is the top of that canister, and your pelvis is the bottom of it. And we want it to be stacked like a Coke can. If your ribs are flared forward, you lose bracing, and you're not able to properly engage your core that is going to keep you in the strongest position. And so a lot of times whenever people think about like the hips back cue, they'll anteriorly rotate their pelvis. Or another big problem with this is watching themselves in the mirror in front of them. And that automatically, whenever you put your head up as you go down, your ribs also want to follow and flare forward. So in order to brace before you start, you don't need to like tuck your tailbone under completely, just find neutral and then exhale until your ribs come down, because if you get a complete exhale, your ribs will depress, and that's your stacked position. And then you can breathe within that braced position. And so then as you come down, if you keep your chin tucked and that braced ribs and over pelvis position all the way through the hinge, that's going to be your strongest positioning, but it's also going to keep the tension in the proper muscles rather than shifting it into your low back.
Very, very well put. This is, I think, one of the, with like a little bit more advanced clients, one of the most common things I'm still focusing on and fixing. Not even just with like our RDLs, but with all like more lengthened by, honestly, with all glute focused movements, like a split squat, any squat pattern, a hip thrust, where there's oftentimes, especially like former CrossFitters, for some reason, just are so stuck in this like ribs flared, chest up, chin up position. And as you said, like your pelvis is going to be less stable, so that's going to hurt our ability to get good force output from the glute. And we're going to drive a lot more of that tension to other tissues, like other hip extenders, right? We're going to get more in our lower back, more in like all of other hip extensor muscles, but our glutes are going to be weaker and kind of disadvantaged there. Um, Anything else you want to add on that side of things, Natalie? You're a big lats girl. Why would not engaging our lats properly on our RDL would be a problem?
Let's occupy like a ton of surface area on our posterior chain. And it's called a
Oh
chain
yeah, they
for a
do.
reason. Yeah, especially mine. No, just kidding. But it's called the posterior chain. Like chain is in it's all connected. So when our lats are not activated, pretty much nothing else is. This is the
Okay.
simplest way I can put it.
Very important part of trunk stability as a whole. Kind of like your core. Almost think of your lats as part of your core. Are they part of your core?
It's the
I don't remember.
posterior spling.
Okay.
Spling.
Um, Going to be a very important part of us keeping our spine stable here. So how would you cue someone to keep their lats engaged in an RDL?
Me? Or
See.
oh. I usually say like pretend like you're holding something underneath your armpits is a good one. That's probably my biggest one. I will sometimes cue like not that, please don't take this out of context, but sometimes I will cue things like shoulders back and down, depending on who I'm talking to and what the context is. But like I'll say whatever I have to say to get what I want, basically. And so I find myself saying that a lot.
Sounds very manipulative. All right. I'll normally say, yeah, imagine somebody's trying to tickle you. You're trying to protect your armpits. Or yes, sometimes just
I
pull
don't
your
like
shoulders
thinking
down.
about that.
It makes you uncomfortable, but you immediately like know what I'm talking about. All right, so we've talked through setup, bracing, and positioning. So basically, we're going to be feet hip width apart, pointed straight forward, hands, thumbs right out, grip to where thumbs are right outside your legs. We are stacking our rib cage over our pelvis. We are engaging our lats. Then we're getting into the actual execution of the lift. So when we are getting into that, one of the most common issues we're going to see right away is your knees drifting backwards or losing toe pressure on the floor as you're lowering the weight. So what's happening here is basically our weight is shifting too far back. We are a bit off balance. We're going to be weaker. We're going to get into our lower back more. So what we want is essentially, for most people, I mean, the easiest way to think about it is just don't let your toes come up. And my door's about to get attacked. Don't let your toes come up and don't let your knees go drift backwards as you just start the descent. For many people will want to have a slight positive shin angle where your knees are actually a little bit forward over your ankle in order to keep your toes in contact with the floor. Does somebody want to pick this up while I let my dog in from here? Why this is important?
Got it, Natalie, or do you want me to?
Take it.
So, whenever you are shifting into your heels, your center of mass comes backward. And in order to keep more tension backward in your glutes and hamstrings, we need to have your center of mass more forward, centered over the midfoot. So, if we also shift the center of mass backward, you're going to feel it a lot more in your low back. The low back is going to take a lot more tension. That I just lost the other thought that I had on that. Oh, also, whenever you're shifting everything backward, you have to think about what our muscle groups that we're working are. So ideally, glutes and hamstrings are taking the most of the tension here. Well, the hamstrings are attaching at the back of the knee. And so if one attachment point comes back and the other stays still, we stretch that muscle to take it through its range of motion. If both of them come back, we don't. So if the knee, which is an attachment point, is also coming back with the hips, we just lose some of that tension from the movement.
Very well put. Anything else to add there, Natalie?
I think one of the biggest disservices to this movement is the cue that has been thrown around too often, which is send your hips back. Like this is what gets a lot of people into trouble. And I mean, it used to for me as well. So, I'm not exempt from that. But like the first thing you ever hear someone say about an RDL is like send your hips back. That's why when you asked me to like review the movement earlier in this podcast, I was like really careful not to say you're sending your hips back. I started with it's a horizontal movement. Um, because when you cue someone to send their hips back, this is exactly like what we see always. And when you think about it, it's just kind of unnecessary and redundant of a cue because that's the movement. Like I don't need to tell someone to send their hips back. Like that's what the movement is. So early on in my coaching career, I used to say that all the time. And
Yeah,
now I like never I can't remember the last time I actually said that.
I hardly ever cue that either. But that, yeah, it used to be the main. When I also didn't know how to RDL, I would tell people to just push their hips back as far as they could, and everybody's backs just hurt, just like mine did. Um, but I mean, in practical application, make sure you're keeping your toes in contact with the floor as you're lowering. If you're not able to do that, your knees are probably drifting backwards. Like video yourself, watch that. Focus on as you lower, keep your knees in place, or even potentially if our toes are still coming up from like the start of the rep, your knees aren't moving backwards at all, your toes are still coming up, then we actually probably need to create a little bit more of a positive shin angle. So let your knees come forward a bit more. Now, gets into another common mistake I see is people, especially when they're trying to finish that rep. So we're about 75% of the way down into the bottom of our RDL. To finish that rep, rather than letting their torso drop, so continuing to drop their torso angle, letting their chest drop, people just stay at like a whatever this angle is, like a 30-degree angle, and just drop their hips more rather than letting their chest drop more to finish the rep. Um, which kind of is like the glute bias RDL. Which I don't really ever coach anymore, but also it doesn't really like typically what I find for people is just like my back hurts. I mean, generally what I'm going to cue is, but I see this very commonly when people are like trying to get to the bottom of a rep. Keep your hips a bit higher. Think about letting your chest continue to drop, where again, like our torso angle relative to the floor is changing, rather than again, it's a lot of times people are like dropping their chest, so your torso angle is changing, getting closer to parallel with the floor through like the first half of the movement, and then you're just kind of turning it into a squat the second half, like dropping your butt down and letting your knees come forward a bit, which again I find typically just makes the movement kind of uncomfortable. Like people get into their lower backs more. Do you guys see that pretty often as well?
I think it's I think people have the perception that more range of motion equals better. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it more often than not, it's less range of motion than you think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like just like a way of trying to get a little bit lower, thinking that they're getting a greater range of motion, or like I need to get lower because I need to get like a stretch. I need a greater range of motion. It's like actually most people don't, myself included, don't really have access to that kind of range. Um,
Mm-hmm. Anything else to add from you, Andrea?
Not really. Not on that.
Do you guys ever program like a glute biased RDL anymore?
Yeah. I don't really
Do you?
call it that, but yeah, and it's something depending on the way someone is built, like I might have to cue that more or less. And like I'm someone, especially with like I'm we could talk about it later, but I'm doing like single leg RDLs right now. And like all I have to think about is like more knee bend, like more than
Mm-hmm.
I think, and that's just really hard for me because that's not intuitive for me, and that's not the way my body's built, and I have like these short little femurs like so for me to like have to like bend my knee and keep my knee in this like for what I perceive a huge bend and also like fold at the hip is really hard. So like yeah, I do, and then like even the total opposite, like the long femur gang, like sometimes I have to like really exaggerate that for them. But I don't, to your point, I don't really like call it like, oh, we're doing a glute bias RDL. But I will force people into positions that are that basically.
Yeah. I like for Michelle right now, I have a low handle trap bar deadlift, which is basically getting us in that same position. What about you, Andrea?
Not really. I consider RDL a very glute bias movement already. And then, if I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to bias more hamstrings, I'll have it cued as more straight knee.
Mm-hmm.
But then the normal RDL is already a glute movement.
I just find a lot of former CrossFitters, and I know this is also partially where my issue comes from, um, are doing more of a hamstring, like a very slight bend in the knee, like barely any. It depends on the person and like how they're going to execute it, but more often than not, don't see much knee bend at all, and we need more. But this is where individual coaching comes in. So if you're listening out there, I'm not telling you to do more or less. I would have to see it first.
Cool. Okay. Next up, going too quickly through the eccentric. This is huge, just people kind of dropping, plummeting into the bottom, no control, and being pulled through way too much range of motion. You're not pulling the weight at all. It is just pulling you through an excess range of motion. And again, that's typically where it's like my back hurts. But this is one of the movements, I would say out of like almost all of our movements, an RDL is probably going to be a movement where the eccentric component, the negative part of the rep, is going to be like the slowest and most controlled out of like almost anything that I do. So go slowly there, at least 2 to 3 Mississippi, at least 2 Mississippi, I think is a good is a good count for that. Range of motion is another important component here. Both people going for too much range of motion is huge. I would say like most new clients starting, someone's just like trying to lower the weight as much as they can. The thing here is once we're out of range of motion at the hip, we want to stop, reverse directions, and come back up. It is not about us raising or lowering the weight as far as we can. Again, it's just about taking the hips through their full range of motion. So once we can't move at the hip anymore, your torso, it depends on the person, your arm lengths, things of that nature, but our torso will be somewhat close to parallel with the floor. Maybe not quite there, perfectly fine if not. But then when we start to get to this point where it's like, okay, now we're like past parallel with the floor and we're reaching forward, we're just basically getting more range of motion from our lower back, losing tension in glutes and hamstrings, and getting more likely to irritate our lower back. So excessive range of motion is a problem. But also just not going through enough range of motion. If we're cutting these off high, like if we're cutting them off above the knee, if we're almost doing like a rack pull type movement just for the sake of moving more load. But again, it's the goal is maximum range of motion at the hip. If we could still get more range of motion at the hip, we do want to take advantage of that. So I realistically, for most people, like if we're doing a barbell RDL, it's going to be somewhere like your range of motion is going to be somewhere between like the bar at the bottom of the rep is going to be a bit below the knee to a couple inches below the knee, somewhere like mid shin to like right below the knee. I would say for most people, if we're stopping like above the knee joint, we're probably not going through a full ROM. Anything you guys would add there?
These things go together, the speed of the eccentric and the range of motion, I've found. And also, even whenever I've cued somebody to have a certain tempo on the eccentric, a lot of times the first third of the eccentric is still super fast, and then they're slowing it up toward the end of it. And whenever the eccentric is too fast, a lot of people are going to first not be able to manage their foot pressure, and that affects your range of motion, but then also kind of be like actively decelerating, and then they're going to stop that range of motion too soon because it's going to feel like if they don't, they're going to hurt themselves. So they're kind of like subconsciously guarding.
Okay. That's a very good point. Focusing too much on sensation with this movement especially is huge. I know we've touched on this in prior podcasts. The Romanian deadlift is not going to feel like a hamstring curl or a glute bridge ever, where you have just this crazy sensation in the target tissue. It is just going to feel like overall the weight is heavy and it's hard to hold. That's a common one I hear is like, it just feels like the weight is really heavy and I feel like I can't hardly hold on to it by the end of the set. And that's normal, right? There's nothing wrong with like, that's not you doing it wrong. It's really heavy and it's hard for you to hold on to. You'll feel like your entire posterior chain working, but this is never going to feel like extremely targeted, like, ooh, that's a glute burner, right? It's not going to feel like a kickback or a glute bridge. It's just going to feel kind of like overall fatiguing. You'll for sure be some sensation in your glutes and hamstrings, but honestly, it'll probably be more so after the set than during the set. Um, or you might just be bitching out and not training these very hard, and that's the problem, which is also common once we work through all of this. Okay, somebody said letting the bar slash dumbbells drift too far from shins. Who is this?
That was me.
What you got? Expand on that for us.
Um, I don't know how much I can expand on it. That's just
Why is this a problem?
it's again like a center of mass thing, and you're in a weaker position whenever the dumbbells or bar is too far out in front of you. Think about like if you're holding a kettlebell in a goblet position right up next to your body versus if you then extend your arms outward, and how much more taxing
Mhm.
that is on your low back or core in general. It's that same thing. Like we want to keep it in tight to the body so that you're in the strongest position and your glutes have the most leverage.
Okay. Okay. So do you want bar like right up next to next to shins, or like what should we do instead?
Yeah, I mean, like right next to your shins is where you want it. You don't I used to think about, my dogs might bark here in a second. I used to think about like scraping my shins whenever I was doing powerlifting type deadlifts. We don't want that because that's going to put you back into your heels. But it shouldn't drift out away from your shins either.
I think like
You don't
over the
have to.
lace.
Over the laces, yeah, that's good.
Yeah. You don't have to wear your shin sleeves anymore.
Yep.
Okay. Breaking at the knees before the hips. Is this you too?
Yeah, this might be a little bit too similar though to the conversation about letting hips drop. I've found whenever somebody is breaking at the knees first, they're making it too squatty and it shifts into their quads.
I want to add a caveat here or counterpoint, I suppose, that I will often cue clients to bend their knees first. I'm having them slow down their setup because, like the clients I was speaking to earlier, myself included, who do not have enough knee bend, I'm like, set the knee bend first. Now, once we set the knee bend, I don't want them bending anymore. Like, I want you to maintain the bend that we have at the knee and then hinge on top of that, which is challenging. But I have a lot of people, like I can think of a handful of people right now, and again, I'm gonna put myself there, who like this is your checklist for like how you set this movement up before we start.
Yeah. I for sure can go both ways with that one. I will if someone's struggling with the toe pressure and like we need more of a forward shin angle as well, I'll sometimes cue people just unlock your knees first. Just like let your knees unlock and like take a second to like look at where your knees are at. This isn't like how I always want them performing their RDL, but just like as a learning tool, look at where your knees are at here. Okay, keep them there and then just go through the rest of the movement. Don't think about like your knees anymore past this, except for just like keeping them right where they're at. So I found value in it there.
Yeah, I don't
But at the
have
same,
people keep their knees locked. To be clear, it seems like people will like seem like they're trying to sit back into a chair.
yeah, I understand what you mean.
Can also go hand in hand with someone just staying too upright.
Hmm.
Like when they're staying more vertical and they're bending at the knee, it's like that's when we get that like almost squat
Yeah, or
pattern.
like they're almost like pushing their shins forward into the bar and leaning back. This is where this cue has backfired for me. Like I completely understand what you're saying. I find instances as well where it turns into like person's almost like leaning back and pushing their shins forward into the bar to start. And then again, we're in a position where we're not going to be able to execute this well. So I completely, I like for sure see both sides of that. Okay. So from there, let's talk through, I mean, from a sequence of cues for quality RDL, I think we've already kind of beat this to death. Basically, hands to where thumbs are just outside of legs, feet pointed straight forward, about hip width apart. Brace, keep your chin down. Don't let your toes come up. Don't let your knees drift back as you lower. Keep your lats engaged and lift the bar. Anything else?
Yeah, I wanted to add, I think I add this every time we talk about the RDL. Like, you'll at some point, like, you probably will feel your low back a little bit because we are working the entire posterior chain, your erectors. Like, so to think that you are going to feel zero sensation in your back, again, like, there's nuance here. Like, we don't want any pain, of course, in your low back, but it it is a back movement. It's posterior chain movement. Like, probably gonna get a little stimulus there. So don't be scared of it.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that at all. Again, distinguishing between like a tissue worked and pain. And like your erectors might even be a little bit sore, probably not used to a whole lot of loading. It's perfectly fine. All right, so talking through different variations of the RDL and when we would use. Let's start with our standard bilateral RDL variation. So we just have 2 feet on the floor. We have the good old barbell RDL, which is going to be a staple for a lot of people. I would say I probably program dumbbells more for people initially, but eventually we can run into not that people actually max out like, okay, my gym has 120 pound or 120 pound dumbbells and I've maxed them out. But a lot of times I find we get to the point where from like a loadability perspective and just to encourage people to continue to progress load, it makes sense to transition to a barbell RDL if they can execute that well. I like it as like it's well-rounded. Barbell RDL is well-rounded. We can make it work for most people. It doesn't come as naturally to most people initially as like a dumbbell RDL, but the loadability aspect and the stability is great. So I do like it from that side of things. Um, any other pros and cons for y'all for the barbell RDL? All right, dumbbell. As I mentioned, gonna be probably the easiest for everyone to master initially. Would you guys agree?
The kettlebell would be easiest.
Okay, yeah. Why is
But
that?
along those lines, very similar.
Yeah.
Just where it puts your center of mass, like the weight of the kettlebell is like right, it puts you exactly where you need to be. So that would be like for an absolute beginner, that would be like my number one go-to. And then very much along that train of thought, you would get to the dumbbell. Um, and as you pointed out, the dumbbell, you start to run into like, okay, it's getting just like a little impractical. Like, taking the dumbbells off the rack and like we're kind of fatiguing for the wrong reasons. But I still really like a heavy dumbbell RDL. Like I really like it. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's again, so like kettlebell, dumbbell, a little bit more intuitive for putting your center of mass where it needs to be.
hmm The freedom of movement you have with the dumbbells to a degree makes it easier to get that down correctly. And
And
again,
okay,
like,
good,
go
excellent
ahead.
point there too. Also, anyone who's having like shoulder issues, who we would want to put in a neutral grip, like that's going to
hmm
be a good thing there. Trap bar, which we're going to talk about too, but similarly there, like any kind of neutral grip, getting them out of that pronated grip. So like a little bit more freedom at the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder.
Yeah, I do think from a bracing perspective, especially like getting your lats more engaged, it is a little bit easier with a dumbbell versus us being in the pronated grip with the barbell. And as a whole, we'll feel just a little bit more comfortable from that side of things. Like it's easier to make the movement fit you, just similar to like a dumbbell press versus a barbell press. Um, okay. But I would say again, I used to always do this when I train people in person. I haven't programmed a kettlebell RDL in forever, but that used to always be like my first step in teaching people how to do an RDL. I may have to bring that back. But typically, like when I'm not confident somebody's gonna be able to do it well, I'm gonna start with a dumbbell RDL. And again, it's very rare I'm like switching from that to a barbell because it's actually like this person maxed out the dumbbells. It's more so just like I can tell the person's getting annoyed with it, which I get because for some reason I get annoyed with it as well. It's just kind of annoying to pick these heavy ass dumbbells up and wrap your wrist straps around them, etc. Trap bar. Um, Angela, thoughts on trap bar RDL? What are our pros and cons?
It is much easier to manage your center of mass, but I don't use it a ton unless we've just kind of done some troubleshooting and this is what feels best for somebody. Just because it's less likely to be at their gym for one. Two, the handles a lot of times are pretty wide, especially for females, especially for small females. And then I think I just have a personal bias against it. I just don't love it.
I respect it.
Those prime trap bars are really nice.
Those are very good. Yeah,
And
but
like,
nobody has that
oh, well, we
except for
do.
Pretty
you.
much.
But when I was like when I was like in the depths of like my shoulder issues, like I was on a trap bar. I was on
Yeah.
dumbbells, and then I think at some point I went to I went to trap bar because the dumbbells were getting a little ridiculous. Um,
The trap bar, yeah, I would agree though. Like in theory, it works. It's great. It gives us a lot of the pros of the dumbbell, and I mean, it's easy to like keep our center of mass right where we want it to be, but it just ends up being too wide for a lot of people, and it just varies so much, like the width of the trap bar, like how high are the handles, etc. If I were, and again, like a lot of women's frames just don't fit it well. It's just too wide. If I was like working with just men, I would probably program a trap bar very, very consistently. Even like a trap bar deadlift, like it's like a more of a power, like a power slash strength movement. You can just kind of rip it and rip it. It's like hard to mess up as like a more lengthened bias glute with like a decent amount of quad movement as well. Like works very well for a lot of men, but I don't think it works as well for our typical client population. B stance RDL. Andrea, B stance, landmine RDL, and single leg RDL. I'm gonna let you two take all of these. I program a B stance RDL. Not something I personally do a whole lot of in my training. I think you two can speak to all of these better. Let's start with B stance, whoever wants to take that.
Oh yeah, I do and program B stance RDLs all the time.
I do program, but I don't do them a ton in my own training. It's like a
You're a hip-
glute med kickback for me. Yeah,
So it's
basically.
basically like you're only doing a bilateral squat pattern and you're skipping out on the split squat.
It is just my program. Sorry, you're very focused. I will ask for a glute med kickback
I do think
and
that
a
it's
B
just
stance RDL.
the reason that I program this quite a bit. It's beneficial to get on one leg with priority muscle groups. So it's a great glute movement. It for a lot of people seems a little bit easier to perform and push themselves on versus the bilateral RDL. And we can get a lot, not only correct my verbiage on this, but I want to say like better hip internal rotation. Like we can just, is that the correct verbiage?
You can
We can
drop
get,
the non-working leg hip more and makes it way easier
yeah,
to get internal
exactly,
rotation.
on
I
that one versus the bilateral.
what I found with myself as well as clients is that we can actually like hide a lot with a bilateral any pattern, right? This could go upper body or lower body, but because we're talking about lower body here, like let's take a bilateral RDL. You can hide a lot of what's going on at the hip and you can get by and your deadlifts look like pretty good. And it's like, oh, okay. But it's like, why am I like not, why is there no mind muscle connection here? Like, why are my glutes not growing the way I think they should be growing? So it's like, well, let's look into this a little further. Enter the B stance RDL, or like a single leg RDL. And it turns out you suck at hip function and like you can't internally rotate. It's like, oh, this is why my glutes aren't growing. It's like, so again, like to the naked eye or even a trained eye, like bilateral RDL looks okay. Peel that away, it's you're so exposed.
Yeah, or
And
maybe on one side you do rotate
yep.
well, and on the other side you don't, which
And
is
that's
me.
normal too, right? Like I normalize this all the time with my clients. Like it's like this side feels better. It's like, yo, that's normal. Okay. Like you're
No,
not
it's
weird.
not. There's something wrong with you.
But that's like very normal. And it's also like it's like I love the B stance RDL or a single leg RDL because it's shining a light on like what we need to do better. And they can be a very frustrating movement, speaking from personal experience. And it can be so tempting. And I have this conversation with clients all the time where they're like, can we just like go back to the bilateral RDL? Like, it's just, and it's like, yes, we could, but remember how your glutes weren't growing. So like we're just gonna go back to make you feel better and like less frustrated. But like 6 months down the line,
Kick the can
if
down
we
the
like
road.
just chip away at this movement that you find really, really not intuitive and difficult, you are probably going to experience more. Like this is telling us there is something here that needs to be addressed. And otherwise you're kind of just kicking the can down the road, as Andrea would say.
Does she
So
say that?
she said it a couple times.
I thought you were the one who said that.
I don't think so.
Do you say that,
I mean,
Andrea?
I just now did.
oh,
Do you
we're
normally say
all
that?
we're all the same person, so
Fair
it's
enough.
not really.
We're all
Um,
married to Nick Rogers. That's all that matters.
Something like a like contralateral, for example, like
Yeah.
landmine B stance RDL is a wonderful tool, not only for like your single leg hinge work and like working on things like internal rotation at the hip, but like using that like contralateral stance in particular with the landmine, you can actually like almost force yourself into that position that you need to be in. And it's a good like tactile movement in that when you get it right, you know immediately. Like it lights your glute up. And so like that immediate feedback, and these are people who are like, I never feel my glutes. Like I don't feel anything. When you get them to feel that, it's like a light bulb moment. And it's like, oh. And I would also say like similarly to that, the single leg RDL, like same kind of idea there. Sorry, there are like police sirens going on in the
It's all good.
background. Can you hear
It's all
them?
good. Yeah, you're good.
Sorry, they
So,
found me.
okay. So it sounds like you guys are big fans of there's going to be a huge, never mind. It sounds like you guys are big fans of the contralateral B stance RDL as well, where we're loading the opposite hand of the working leg, be
Yeah,
it
I
landmine
don't
or
ever
dumbbell.
program a true single leg RDL though. Natalie, what do you use that one for?
I'm using it because I think some people actually can wrap their brains around that a little bit more than the B stance. Yeah, interestingly enough, because you can't use the back leg. So one of kind of like the biggest mistakes that I see with a B stance RDL or like a split squat, for example, is performing a unilateral movement like a bilateral movement. It's like we're actually like totally cheating that lateral hip shift, and we're
Yeah.
just like we just have like weight in both of our legs. And so similarly with that B stance, the tendency for a lot of people is to put a lot of weight in that back foot rather than just kind of using it for balance. So you take that away with the single leg RDL and you are forced to, again, like find that balance, get that lateral hip shift, like shift into that hip and then hinge from there. So
For all your unilateral movements, keep them unilateral. That's so common. Like same with a dumbbell split squat. Like people are trying to load the back leg so much, and like there's a reason we're making this a essentially single leg movement. Load the front leg. Um, okay, yeah, I don't really program that single leg RDL personally, but that's a good point. I'll have to potentially try that as well. I personally just balance is always such an issue for me with that, but
Me too.
should be of no surprise.
I've been like something I've been telling clients a lot lately, and I really like this cue, is like when they go to set up their split squat, or in this case, like B stance RDL or their single leg RDL, is like grab the weight and like start on one leg. So like lift up the back foot, balance, find the foot pressure, then put the back foot down, or then put the back leg down, or then use the hand support or whatever. Because that way, like you see people like you see them shift into the hip, which is exactly what we're trying to get you to do, is to shift your center of mass over that lead leg. But again, how many times do you see people like when they film their setup, they're just like the first thing they do, it's like the back foot goes up immediately.
Hmm.
And it's like, again, this is now we're performing a unilateral movement like a bilateral movement. So like take a second to set yourself up, like find the foot pressure, find the balance, like find the hip shift, like shift your center of mass over that lead leg, then set the back foot down. There's always dog drama here.
Sorry, dog delays. Yes. Okay, so in terms of movement prep for RDLs, any specific movements or drills y'all find helpful to prep clients for RDLs? I know you had kind of alluded to this earlier, Natalie.
Um, like the hip airplanes. Again,
Same.
especially if we're doing single leg work, like so that you can actually experience what it feels like to like shift it from external to internal hip rotation. I really like sometimes like even if I'm not programming like a B stance RDL, I'll program like a landmine contralateral B stance like in a primer is one that I really like. Yeah.
I really like hip airplanes as well. Just something to especially get you into internal rotation. If we can just move through internal and external rotation. Um, I don't even know what to call them. Ridpath also has this like it's a YouTube video because I saw. It's kind of like a diagonal reverse lunge. We're getting to
Oh
internal
yeah,
rotation, and then we're
I have
like
those.
It's the wall
stepping
stride.
towards, yeah, the wall strider or whatever you call it, where you're really getting into a bit of external rotation as you like lunge outward and really open up your hip and push your hand to the wall. I also really like those personally. I don't even, what are you, they're called wall strides?
Wall striders. I do
Wall
those too.
striders. Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Those are
okay.
my one.
Like more of a dynamic. Like I often like a like hip airplane, hand supported because I have terrible balance, but try to use it to the minimum. And then like as a more like almost passive internal external rotation, and then again like more dynamic, like I'll go into that wall strides. Honestly, past that, then I just like actually doing a couple more sets of an RDL to get ready for it. I do like a B stance RDL though as well, especially really focusing on like owning that bottom position. Um, I did like for occasionally like a heel elevated, like a B stance RDL also, or just heel elevated dumbbell RDL, just to get somebody really used to a bit more of a forward shin angle and like maintaining that toe pressure can be a good kind of primer. I don't use that one quite as often as I did for a while though. Anything else in terms of movement prep? Cool. Okay. Sequencing. Where do we like to put this within a session? Honestly, if I have someone doing an RDL, most of the time I am probably going to have it as early in the session as possible, simply because it's going to be one of our most technical movements, which I am generally going to want to prioritize putting earlier in the session. If said person has like back issues and maybe I want to pre-exhaust hamstrings a bit more or whatever, maybe I would like sequence a hamstring curl first, like a lion leg curl into an RDL. I'm not opposed to. Almost can kind of serve as like some of our priming work and get us ready for that. Or like even like, I mean, us training the adductors will make it a bit easier to get into like a lengthened position glute. So maybe if I'm going to program, I guess like an adductor movement, maybe do that first. But I'm typically going to program it as early in the session as possible. Of course, there's nuances there, but I would say if I mean, they're still quite technical, but like with the total loading being lower, I find like a B stance RDL a little bit easier for me to program like slightly later in the session, but it would still probably take priority in like the first half of the session. What's y'all's take? Agree, disagree?
I think I trend towards earlier because I feel like it's mentally demanding too.
Also important, yeah.
People have to concentrate and like think about what they're doing, especially like with these single leg RDLs that we've been talking about, requires a lot of concentration. And, a lot of times by the end of the session, it's like that's why calves go at the end, it's like pretty brainless.
I always get calves at the start of my training. I don't know why.
Why is
Andrea, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Anyone have anything else to add on our RDLs before we wrap it up then?
Yeah, I want to go back to why you do calves early. I'm just kidding.
I have small calves. That's why my calves get put at the start of my sessions, guys. Okay. If you enjoy the show, do us a huge favor. Leave us a 5-star rating and review. If you would like to apply for coaching, hit the link in the show notes, and we will catch you guys next time.